What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA show. And as we have wrapped up with 2024, and Justin and I did a really fun wrap-up show yesterday about all sorts of things. Favorite fight, favorite UFC card, most delusional fighter, just a bunch of fun categories. I wanted to follow up and dive a little bit deeper into my favorite fights of 2024, me personally. Now, again, this is not the best fights of 2024. This is me individually, and I say that for a reason because I want to acknowledge that these are subjective, but I'm going to explain why I believe these are why I believe, to me, these are the three best fights, again, with my subjective opinion. So with my subjective flavor thrown in there. So again, my three favorite UFC fights of 2024, and you can hear me out. And maybe this might make you change your mind and make you feel subjectively that these were also the three best fights of the year. Now, just off the top, I want to note that this, to me, was the most incredible year in the history of the UFC by far, which is something special to say considering that Conor McGregor did not grace the Octagon, even though his stardom, regardless of what people want to say, is still quite high. People will gravitate towards Conor McGregor headlines still to this day. We wanted to see him fight. I was very excited for that potential June fight against Michael Chandler. I think that would have been really exciting and really fun and just answer a lot of questions about Conor. So that was a disappointment. But despite the fact that he wasn't able to make the walk to the Octagon, this was my favorite year in the history of the UFC. The reason why I want to start off the bat by saying that is I do notice a lot of times with folks that talk about the UFC or MMA journalists or things like that, and not to say that they're not speaking objectively or openly or honestly about the UFC. But look, it's just like this in life in general. And I try to operate by these same principles in the business that I run and in my daily interactions with people. You have a choice to look at positives or negatives and focus in on those. You have a choice to be a pessimist or an optimist. I've always tried to choose to be an optimist within the bounds and confines of reality so that I'm not blinded by negatives or whatnot. And I understand the importance of doing solid journalism and also not shying away from the negatives. And I'm not saying that anybody should do that, but I just want to let you guys know that I think if you really look at the positives of this year, we can all agree the UFC is something special. And I feel like as fans, we should really take a moment to appreciate what they have done and what they have built over the last, 30 some years. I don't know, because even the UFC was around in the early 90s. I don't remember exactly when Dana White and the Fertitta brothers purchased it, but it's been a long time. It's been a long time. And to have it continue and to not sputter out like so many other fight and MMA organizations, but have it to be not only continue, but be thriving at this point where now it's getting attention from all these other sports. You see fans in other professional sports, from soccer, from football, from basketball, all gravitating towards this special organization because it's real and it's truly showing amazing athletic competition in the most terrifying sport on the planet. And for them to have created a platform where we get to appreciate and enjoy this amazing sport, watch these guys battle it out, learn so much about them and about ourselves through the process, I think it's something we need to be grateful for. And it was truly spectacular. One of the things that I wanted to point out, and this wasn't on my favorite card of the year category, I didn't list UFC 306, but I do think another thing that people should recognize is, remember, UFC 306 very well may have been a losing operation financially for the UFC, but the UFC and Dana White wanted to put on a show, I believe, that really wowed fans and blew people away. They want to do something different that has never been done before and may never well be repeated because of the massive financial cost. And that's special because that's an organization that's still trying to one up themselves, that's still trying to take it to the next level. We don't see that in other organizations. We don't see that in the NFL or the NBA or these other organizations that have a protocol, and maybe there's micro adjustments here and there, but doing something this large where they know they're going to lose money, but just to wow the fans and to grow the sport, because it's still, as big as it is, it can still grow. To grow the sport in this way with these sort of out of the box ideas that most other, I think, fighting promotions would think are crazy, I think that's really special. And as much as people complain about this, that, or the other, I know people are complaining about undeserved title shots, maybe, which again is a bit subjective. They've complained about some of the operations and the timings of UFC fights, this, that, and the other. We, I think, need to take a moment as 2024 ends to be appreciative of this incredible, incredible sport that we get to watch year round. And it's really something special. And then again, one last thing I do want to mention, which I have mentioned before we get into the fun stuff, okay? One thing I do want to mention is that when people are criticizing the UFC, they often do it from a standpoint of meritocracy or a standpoint of, this should have gone this way because of that, right? They have these different subjective reasons, whether it boils down to a fighter that they like or a way of judging that they feel like win askew or whatnot. That timing issue, I know people were very upset with the timing of the Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad fight and card in general. Remember, the UFC has to make decisions at the end of the day that support their bottom line and also that help to grow the sport. And what a lot of the decisions they're making today, and I'm not inside the organization, but I can see what they're doing. A lot of the decisions they're making today are going to influence the how fighters get paid in the future. And if they're just going to take all the money right now and not push towards promotion and marketing and development and events like UFC 306 to continue to grow the sport, it could very well eventually sputter out if they just distribute the money. And it could follow sort of a similar path as what boxing has followed, where there's not real proper organization and a stable platform for which these fighters to come up and kind of grow. And that's why there's been, and I'm not a boxing expert, but of course we know it's one of the most, or the most corrupt sport that has ever, I think maybe ever existed. So I just wanted to say this at the top and tell me if you agree or disagree, but I do think it's important to think about what the UFC has really accomplished. And it's whether or not you agree or disagree that maybe fighter pay is exactly where it needs to be. I think it's going in the right direction. And it wouldn't be here if they wouldn't have done what they had done in the past. That's my true feeling. And we wouldn't have this massive audience and this massive fandom for the sport, which again pays for everybody, pays for the staff, pays for the fighters, et cetera, et cetera. So let's take a moment to be positive and be appreciative for what the UFC has done so far. And hopefully it's paving the way for an even brighter and better future for fighters and UFC staff and so on and so forth in the future. But anyways, without further ado, as we now come to the close of 2024, let's get into this. I've been wanting to talk about this. So the thing was, yesterday, when we did our awards show, we only got to talk about our favorite fight of the year, and I touched on maybe a couple others. But now I wanted to touch on these 3 fights that really wowed me, and I'm going to explain why. It's a combination of factors. It's not just the quality of the fight, but there's many other factors, in my opinion, that go into what makes a fight truly, truly spectacular and really wows me. And again, off the bat, I know we have Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje which blew people away. We had 2 amazing fights from Ilia Topuria, which were incredible. Whatever people want to say about Chito Vera getting a title shot, that was a great fight with him versus Sean O'Malley. There were so many fights. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Islam versus Dustin. There were so many fights that were incredible this year, but these are the ones that stand out when I look back. Maybe a slight bit of recency bias because these are fight cards near the end of the year. But you guys let me know if you think that has somewhat clouded my judgment. So without further ado, here we go. Fight number 1. And this is kind of actually in order. This would be my number 1. This is what I picked yesterday. And I'm going to tell you why I think this fight meant so much to me and why I think it was so incredible. Now, remember, this was not Alex Pereira's first fight of the year, second fight of the year. This was his 3rd fight of the year, and it was only October. And this is after he had taken a short notice fight to come in and save UFC 300. I believe the prior fight to that, when he fought Yuri, which was also incredible, or maybe it was after. I can't remember the exact timeline, but he had fought Yuri Prohaska and Jamal Hill. I'm double checking right now the exact order that year. So this is his 3rd fight. What champion is out there doing what he's doing and taking on? Yeah, no, sorry. So he did UFC 300 and saved that card. Then in June 29th, he saved the card again because that's when Conor and Michael Chandler, or Conor McGregor, backed out of that fight. He saved it again, fought Yuri, basically had a first-round knockout, but time expired. Yuri came back, and then he immediately KO'd Yuri with a brilliant head kick at the start of round 2. Absolutely incredible. And then we come to this final showing in October against Khalil Rountree. Now, when the fight was announced, Khalil, I think, was ranked number 8 in the UFC heavyweight or light heavyweight division. And I wasn't so excited about it. There were other matchups that I wanted to see a bit more. So it is what it is. That's the order that they chose to go in. I think a lot of us wanted to see Magomed Ankalaev take on Pereira, but it is what it is. It was what it was, and they chose Khalil Rountree. But the cool thing about Khalil is we do know he's got a solid Muay Thai background. He loves the stand-up game. He wasn't planning to go to the ground, so we did know we would probably get a pretty fun stand-up battle. But I think what I and most people anticipated was that Pereira was going to be dominant in this fight and was going to probably come out triumphant early. But that's not what happened. Now, one of the things that makes a fight so special, in my opinion, as a diehard fan, and I want to know if other people agree or disagree, but I think you'll agree, is how we feel about the fighter. If this is a beloved fighter that is one of our favorite fighters, of course, that adds to the magnitude and the appeal and the fun level of watching this fighter compete. And to me, Alex Pereira is one of my favorite fighters right now in the UFC. Maybe he's my second favorite, honestly, right behind Khamzat Chimaev. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. And it's a combination of things. It's the way he carries himself. Even though he doesn't speak English, you can just tell he's a respectful guy. He seems like a really funny guy. He seems like a cool guy that people love. Nobody says anything negative or bad about him. The way he shows up for these short notice fights. And maybe, man, that's the thing that a lot of people say you shouldn't do to save your career, to protect your career. But he's doing it and he's winning. And he's winning like by large margins. Very impressively with just tremendous technique, and the way he does it is absolutely incredible. So that strength of character combined with the way he fights, combined with his willingness to support the UFC and save events time after time again, you just got to rally around this guy. And then on top of it, you add to the fact that he just joined the sport not too long ago, several years ago, and has acquired this supplementary skill set of a ground game. And you may say, okay, well, his ground game is not proven, fine, but at least to have enough where he's not totally vulnerable if he's taken down to the ground. We saw Michael Venom Page get pretty brutally handled when he was taken to the ground. And I think Alex Pereira has solid enough takedown defense where it makes him, coupled with his unbelievable assets in kickboxing, makes him just a tremendous, tremendous force to be reckoned with in the UFC and mixed martial arts. So you take all this, people love the guy. And now we put him in this fight that a lot of people thought was going to be a landslide victory for Alex Pereira, but that wasn't what we saw. And why? Maybe there's reasons. Maybe I know there was some thoughts of Alex Pereira perhaps having some injuries. I think that was talked about after the fact. I don't know. I'm not even going to get into that. But and by the way, Khalil Rountree deserves tremendous respect. He fought an incredible fight, unbelievable first 2 rounds. So we watched that fight. And then the other thing that makes a fight incredible is the story. It's kind of like a song. A brilliant, beautiful song follows almost a story arc, a progression, and can have some darker notes, lighter notes, and then eventually this amazing climax and a beautiful finish. That's what makes a song tremendous. That's what can make the perfect fight tremendous. And that's what we saw here. We saw Alex face crazy adversity. Khalil winning on every judge's scorecard the first 2 rounds. And fans like me who love Alex Pereira I was actually worried and sad because he's gotten to that point, I think, in many fans' eyes where we just want to see him win. We don't want to see him lose. And I thought he was going to lose at that point. And I was really shocked. He was looking rough in rounds 1 and 2. And then somehow he reached deep inside his soul and pulled something out that it's almost like otherworldly, where he was looking like he was slowing down in rounds 1 and 2. And I think even Khalil talked about this. And then all of a sudden, his energy levels seemed to go up in round 3, which was inspiring to say the least. And then started dominating near the end of round 3. I mean, really dominating. And I think Khalil talked about just how crazy it was to watch Alex almost like come back to life and be revived. And then we have that incredible demonstration of beautiful striking and kickboxing in round 4, where he's picking up the pace, seeming to hit even harder than he ever did in rounds 1 and 2, figuring out Khalil Rountree and coming back from near defeat, and then just boom, 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 laying it on him, TKO victory. And everybody goes nuts. that entire arc, watching him battle back from adversity, come through, coupled with how much everybody gathers around this guy and rallies around him, and the fact that he put everything on the line when he already had a tremendously successful year with 2 amazing title defenses, both short notice, both where he's saving the cards. You know, we have all of this, and he still goes out and takes this fight and then nearly puts it all on the line and loses, but comes back, finds the will and mental strength to come back. So I think you got to agree, or hopefully you agree with me, that this was just the greatest fight when you look at all the circumstances in totality of the year. That's why it was so incredible to me, and that's why it was definitely my favorite fight of the year. Okay, moving on. The next fight that we're going to go to is my favorite fighter in the UFC, number 1, slightly above Alex Pereira, Khamzat Chimaev. So this was Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker, arguably one of the greatest middleweight fighters in the history of the UFC. We know he lost to Israel Adesanya twice, but that second fight was very on the margins, and he's beaten pretty much everybody else. I think he beats Whittaker. Maybe it'd be close, but I think he could beat Whittaker if they rematched. He could take anybody. He's the man. Now we look at Khamzat Chimaev, somebody who burst onto the scene in 2020 with so much hype, the way he was finishing and dominating people, plus his mindset, his attitude, the way he is on the mic, which is really just himself, sincere, honest. And that's what I always say. That's what makes a star, somebody that's just able to be so comfortable and calm in their own skin that they can just be free and be them. Not a Colby Covington, not a person who has to put on an act and do all this crazy outlandish things just to get people to pay attention. Khamzat is the real. Khamzat is the real deal. And that's why I think he's going to be the biggest star in the history of the UFC one day. Even though I think everybody was looking for the next biggest star to be a clone of a carbon copy of Conor McGregor. But I just don't think we've ever seen somebody like Khamzat. And once Khamzat finally gets that belt and is able to showcase all his full skill sets and do what he can do in the UFC, I think that's going to raise him to a new level. And he's going to be the new prototype for what a true UFC mixed martial artist star is in the UFC. But anyways, we saw Khamzat burst onto the scene. He had this tremendous potential, was about to fight Leon Edwards. They were jumping him in the rankings. People back in 2020 were saying, we think this guy might be able to beat Kamaru Usman, even though he's so brand new, showcasing skills, tremendous skills on the ground, best skills in the UFC on the ground. But then on top of it, devastating striking when he knocked out Gerald Meerschaert. And say what you will about where Gerald Meerschaert is, you know, he wasn't in the top 5, not even the top 10, but he's still a dangerous opponent. And he was fighting in welterweight at the time, moved up to middleweight and still knocked him out in 15 or 17 seconds of the first round. These are crazy statistics. So he had all this momentum, was about to fight Leon, and I believe he would have won that fight for sure, especially after we seen what happened between him and Bilal. And then he got COVID, and they had to try to reschedule that fight 3 times. Khamzat was so devastatingly ill that he wanted to retire from the sport at one time. And I'm going to make a whole deep dive into what happened at some point. But basically, he had met with tons of doctors. They were telling him that he would never fight again. He said that himself in interviews, that his career was basically over. But again, fighting back from adversity. And I don't even think none of us really know the full story. And hopefully one day he'll tell it. But just like how Alex Pereira had to fight back in his fight, Khamzat Chimaev had to fight for his life, had to fight for his career, and was nearly completely sidelined. But he did. He had half of his thyroid gland removed, which was recently. I talked about that in one of his interviews that he recently talked about. Thankfully, when you have half of your thyroid gland removed, you usually don't have to go on hormone replacement for the rest of your life. Usually the remaining piece will pick up the functionality of, you know, what was lost, and you usually can be just fine. On top of that, he has redesigned his training regimen. He admitted that he used to overtrain. He's dialed that back. He started training in, I think, like the mountains in Russia as opposed to in the UAE. He's had to make all of these adjustments because he had so many health problems. And throughout this, he's going in and fighting Gilbert Burns, winning. But people are giving him crap because he didn't dominate, because they're like expecting him to be like an X-Men, Wolverine, just blasting through everybody just because of what we saw. Hey, Gilbert Burns is an incredible fighter. They had a battle, but he won. And then people's like, oh, he's all hype. Okay. Then he goes and completely dismantles Kevin Holland. Nobody gives him credit for that. They're like, oh, yeah, Kevin Holland, not so good. Dude, Kevin Holland's a great fighter. Has anybody ever done that to Kevin Holland? Ever? Just steamrolled him and smashed him the way that Khamzat did? But this is what's happened to Khamzat. It's almost like when you're so good, people just want to hate on everything, and they have expectations of you being Superman, and it's just you can't match them. Then he goes out and has a super dominant performance against Kamaru Usman, at least in round 1. Say what you will about round 2 and 3, but if you rewatch that fight, he did an amazing job. He clearly won that fight. Yeah, he didn't get a finish, but nobody has done what he did to Kamaru Usman in terms of the takedown game. And who has the most respect for him? Who predicted that he would win against Robert Whittaker when everybody was going against Khamzat? Kamaru Usman. So if that doesn't tell you the level of respect that fighters have for Khamzat Chimaev, a champion of champions, and Kamaru Usman just believing so much in Khamzat's skills, and I don't know what to tell you guys. But anyways, nevertheless, tons of doubt. If you looked at James Lynch's interviews where he goes through and interviews fighters, what do you think for the Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat fight? Everybody had lost faith in him completely. And a lot of fighters, man, I think it was like 17-5 or something crazy. It was like a massive proportion of fighters were picking Robert Whittaker to beat Khamzat Chimaev. And I kind of get it. Even Justin picked him. I kind of get it. Robert Whittaker is, as I mentioned, one of the greatest middleweight fighters of all time. So I get it from that perspective. But people had just forgotten all the things that Khamzat is able to do and the things that he has done. And then we have the fight. And then we think about the stakes. We think about one of the most fun thing in the sport of mixed martial arts, in the organization of the UFC, is watching a fighter that could be the greatest of all time on the come up, on the rise, and just watching to see if they can pull it off every step of the way, how much danger they have to fend off, all the obstacles, all the odds they have to overcome, and all his health issues that nearly sidelined him completely and just destroyed his career. But he fought back, battled back, made the walk on October 26th to face off against Robert Whittaker. And then after all the challenges, after everything that had happened, he goes in there and just goes straight forward with a shot at early on in the first round that people said they have never seen that speed and that agility, where he goes low and just shoots from such a distance, still gets him and immediately takes him down. Robert Whittaker tries to scramble. He has tremendous grappling and wrestling himself, tries to scramble out of it, was not able to do so. And then the way that Khamzat Chimaev finishes the fight was crazy. I want to say a couple things about this. I know some people were saying, oh, well, the only reason why it worked is because Robert Whittaker had an issue with his lower teeth, and that's why they pushed in, and that's why the fight ended the way it did. Otherwise, wouldn't have ended and whatever. Well, first of all, that's never happened to Robert Whittaker. Okay. So we have to recognize that, if this was just such a freak accident and Khamzat deserves no credit, why has this never happened to him before? Okay. So regardless of what's going on with Robert Whittaker and his physiology, we have to give credit to Khamzat Chimaev for being able to execute the strategy, the takedown, all these other things. That's number one. Number two, I do not think this was a total fluke, because if you look at the training footage of Khamzat leading up to this fight, he was sparring and pulling off face cranks in sparring. You can see it if you watch the video leading up to this fight, where they kind of show Khamzat training in the mountains of Russia. One of the coolest videos for a fight buildup I've ever seen the UFC produce, by the way. Go back and rewatch it. It's insane. And you just listen to Khamzat talk, and he's like so confident and sure of himself. It's like a movie. It's amazing. But anyways, he was practicing face cranks, and he's never said this, but my theory is that face cranks, Khabib got one against Conor, but I think they're hard to pull off for the average person because you need a tremendous amount of strength. Otherwise, most people won't tap to it. But I believe Khamzat, because he's has like superhuman strength, I believe that this is a technique that he's realized he can submit people with regularly and routinely. And so I think he would have submitted anybody with this level of face crank this early in the round, where the fighters are this dry and he's still got this much fuel in the tank. I think he'd finish anybody, and I think he knows it. And it just so happened, unfortunately, that Robert Whittaker had the issue with his teeth, and they kind of got pushed in. The one positive is it did prompt Robert Whittaker to then go ahead and replace his teeth and do something that he said he had meant to do for a long time. So there were some net positives that did come out of this for Robert Whittaker. But circling back to this fight, because of the stakes, because of what it meant for Khamzat Chimaev, and also because of the fact that he is my favorite fighter. So there's that level of subjectivity that has to be inserted into this. But because now it restored the faith and the belief in everybody that Khamzat is the real deal, number one, and number two, he probably, not probably, very, very likely is the greatest fighter in the history of the UFC, and that nobody that we're aware of has a shot against him. That's wild. That's wild. Like, that's a big deal. And the more I talk about it, it almost makes me want to put it above Alex Pereira. I just can't. Just given Alex Pereira's activity and everything that he accomplished and achieved this year with those 2 short notice fights, saving the cards, still putting on brilliant performances, being injured in those fights, having broken toes. I mean, like, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. But I mean, this to me was, I think maybe people will look back on this moment even more fondly. And once we see what Khamzat is able to do, and once we see him accomplish what I believe he will accomplish in the next several years. But yeah, to me, this fight was so incredible, and I think will be something that stands out in the history of the UFC and will only grow richer and richer in terms of its implications for the future of the UFC and where it goes as time passes. So anyways, there's fight number 2. Now we go to fight number 3, the last fight. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this one, but Jon Jones versus Stipe. Now, again, as we think about the rubric for how we make these assessments, again, stakes, they matter. The Khamzat Chimaev fight, the stakes matter because he's on his way to his first ever title shot, which I believe is going to happen either in the spring or the summer, likely in the Middle East against the winner of Dricus. Or I don't think he's going to fight Alex Pereira. I hope he doesn't. I don't want my 2 favorite fighters fighting each other. I wonder if a lot of you guys feel the same way. I don't want to see that fight. But anyways, the stakes magnify by far the outcome and sort of it just makes the fight that much more amazing. I mean, we can all say that even with the Conor Khabib fight back in the day, the stakes were so high. It was for the belt, but also all of this turmoil and this personal beef that was going on that just added a tremendous amount to that fight. This, to me, had those same stakes. Now, the only problem with this fight, I think for most people, is that because of a lot of YouTube influence from, and I'm, by the way, when I talk about MMA Guru, like, just know, and MMA Guru, I comment on his streams a lot. He knows me in terms of, like, I mean, sure, he doesn't know, he doesn't like watch our channel. I don't think he does, but I mean, I know he would recognize my name. I just want to say, like, I'm a fan, and he knows. I compliment him all the time in terms of the breadth of knowledge that he has. I mean, he is an expert, and what he does entertainment wise in terms of entertaining people just by sitting on the mic and being on there for 4, 5, 6 hours, nobody can do it. The way he responds to donations, like, people just think like, oh, he's a jerk, he's this and that, but like, people need to give him a lot of credit. He's one of the most talented guys in the space. He might be the most talented MMA YouTuber out there. And yeah, like, I like it when he defends fighters that are being overlooked. I like it when he gives us valuable insights, when he adds a lot of value to the sport. What I'm not the biggest fan of is when he kind of piles on and almost like bullies certain fighters. And I know he would respond to me by saying, well, Jon Jones deserves it because of this, that, and the other. I'm just not a fan of doing that to any fighter, regardless. Like, I'm happy to call out Colby Covington and talk about, why I think he's doing terrible things and why I think, I don't think so highly of him. But I'm not going to sit here and go on a campaign and just try and bully him ad nauseum and just, I don't know. And I think MMA Guru has a lot of times talked about Jon Jones from a moral perspective. And look, it's one thing to talk about somebody like Colby who's he's putting all this stuff out there and literally just trying to bring down other people. And that all the negative stuff that, people talk about with Colby, it's all out there. He's putting it out there intentionally. With Jon Jones, look, we just don't know the nature of everything that's going on in his family life with his, behind the scenes. There can be a lot of complexities that are going on behind the scenes, maybe mental illness, maybe struggles with depression. I'm not giving him excuses per se. I just don't know. And I'm not going to talk about things that I don't know about with so much intensity and just try and smash somebody's character and destroy their career. That's the part that I'm just like, I haven't been the biggest fan of from MMA Guru. And like, yo, he has the freedom and right to talk about what he wants to talk about on YouTube. But anyways, coming back to this, why I think this is important to the story is because he has such a tremendously strong fan following. He just went after Jon Jones, video after video after video, also talking about his sexual orientation, which I just like was never a fan of at all. I don't even know, whatever. But I think the combination of all this negative videos he made, plus like MMA Guru loves Tom Aspinall, and I get it. They're both from the UK. But because of that, he was just shouting and screaming that this fight against Stipe was nonsense and that he's ducking Tom Aspinall and all these other things. So I think a lot of fans unfairly got soured on this fight. And I made videos about why I think it was unfair to call Jon Jones a duck and all this stuff. I'm not going to go into detail there. I want to focus more on this fight, but so I think that's why this fight did not get the pop that it deserved. So let me tell you why I think it's my third favorite fight, or one of the most important fights of the year. Let's talk about the stakes here. And and he may now fight Tom Aspinall, so we don't even need to discuss that, right? I think it's about to happen. I think it's about to be announced. It seems like negotiations have come to a close, and Jon Jones is happy. At least that's what it seems to be. I don't know if that's true, but we will find out shortly, I'm sure. But let's look at this stuff on paper. We have Stipe, the greatest heavyweight of all time, fighting Jon Jones, arguably the greatest, probably in most people's eyes, the greatest fighter of all time. That's a big deal. People want to say Stipe wasn't active and was older and all this stuff. It's such a double standard. People were, when the idea of GSP coming back to fight Khabib was being talked about, people were so excited. It would have been a super fight. Nobody was like, this is lame. GSP's been retired for 3 years, 4 years. Like, we don't want to see this. He's old, blah, blah, blah. So it's such a double standard. People were like, oh, let's see what goes down. We don't know. This is very exciting. Whereas with Stipe, for some reason, everybody just put him to the side, thought Jon Jones was going to run through him and run through him because Stipe was just not ever going to compete at the same level again. Not because of how skilled Jon Jones is. Jon Jones did end up having a very dominant performance, but you got to give Jon Jones credit. He's the best, right? But anyways, people just hated on this fight, maybe because the last fight we saw Stipe he lost. And so maybe that colored people's judgment. I also think that the way that a lot of the MMA community went after this fight and were calling for Tom Aspinall, I think that all tarnished it. But anyways, for me, when I was looking at it, I'm like, we can't look past Stipe. Stipe is a dangerous fight. Even Ariel Helwani said this is a 50-50 fight. He said that before going in. One of the biggest experts in mixed martial arts, right? He's been there since the beginning. So if you didn't allow your thought of this fight to be clouded by all the negativity that was in the space, there were massive stakes on the line. Stipe, an incredibly dangerous fighter, somebody who's beaten Francis Ngannou. Yeah, he lost to him, but he also beat him. And a fighter who people thought was going to have the speed advantage against Jon Jones. So we have this great fight. Jon Jones beats Ciryl Gane. Now he goes in and fights Stipe. And I said this too, like we need to be appreciative of the fact that Jon Jones still wants to fight after all he's accomplished at 37, still being in there, still putting himself on the line to do great things and to entertain us. And we need to be grateful this is happening, not sit here crying that this fight didn't happen or that fight didn't happen, which again, that's the UFC setting it up. It's not Jon Jones, but anyways. And then we see this tremendous performance from Jon Jones. So we have incredibly high stakes, fighting the greatest heavyweight of all time, truly cementing his legacy. And then the way in which he won the fight was brilliant. It was a mixture of so many different skill sets of, I think it was a hip toss, or I can't remember, like a foot trip. The way he took Stipe down was such a creative way to take him to the ground. Then he gets on top of him with showing a tremendous display of just supreme wrestling ability, mixing it up with ground and pound elbows and all sorts of things that just we don't see too often in the fight. That was in the first round. And that first round barrage, that really slowed Stipe down. Then they go into the second. Again, Jon Jones is very dominant. Stipe does have his moments, but he's showing great striking and stand-up ability on his feet. And then we get to the third round where the fight finishes. And how does Jon Jones do it? With a spinning back kick. Now, I tried to look this up and to see how many times a spinning back kick has ever even been thrown in the heavyweight division. I couldn't get a specific answer, but the AI Google whatever thing said is extremely rare. I think it mentioned like 2 other fighters that it knew of that had ever thrown a spinning back kick in a heavyweight fight. I don't know how many there have even been thrown, But I think it's maybe one of one where a fight has been finished from a spinning back kick. That's how it got finished. That's crazy. And so to see Jon Jones, such a versatile fighter, when we have these new waves of generation after generation of new waves of MMA fighters that grew up fighting MMA. Jon Jones, when he was coming up, there weren't like MMA gyms. You know, he came from a wrestling background, built in the strikes, all this stuff. So somebody, an OG fighter who's been on top for this long, but still showing all of this creativity and this ability to be so well-rounded in a sport that has evolved tremendously since its inception, or since the inception of the UFC. You got to stand back and be in awe of that. You know, you compare that with other fighters that really kind of stayed a little bit more one-dimensional as they've come up, not Jon Jones. And he's been there longer than most of these guys. So to me, this fight showed so many incredible things about Jon Jones, what he's able to accomplish, the stakes, again, cementing his legacy, and now maybe leading into this fight that everybody wants. And I think that is going to feed into the buildup of how incredible this Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones fight will be. So as much as people were mad, you got to be grateful that it happened, because now they're going to negotiate, or maybe the negotiation's done. They're probably going to announce this Jon Jones Tom Aspinall fight, which everybody wanted so badly. So hey, there you go. All the people that were complaining, you're welcome, and you got this fight to thank. You got Jon Jones fighting Stipe to thank for that outcome. So there you go. Those are my 3 favorite fights of the year. Again, let me know which ones were your 3 favorite. Let me know if you disagree with me, and how vehemently so, in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But there you go. Tremendous year in the UFC. Loved it. Such a big fan. Will continue to be a big fan. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much for joining. If you like this video, make sure to click that like button. If you want to see more from the 10-7 MMA channel, make sure to click subscribe. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.